Good evening, everyone. As you were introduced, I'm Rob Woosley. I'm a member of the Guild of Battlefield Guides, and I'm a battlefield tour guide with Woolsey's War Walks. What we're going to talk about today is one of the most important battles of this early period of the Second World War, and one that happens to have its anniversary tomorrow. The Battle of Britain is the first military campaign fought entirely by air forces. The British were essentially going it alone, as all of its European allies had been conquered by Nazi Germany. This is not entirely the truth, because it had the air forces of Africa, Australia, Canada, the Caribbean, India, South Africa, and New Zealand, along with all the militaries in exile, such as Belgium, Czechoslovakia, Denmark, France, Netherlands, Norway, Poland, and Yugoslavia. Unique to the British Imperial forces was that all of their air forces were fully integrated together, meaning that while they each had their own air force, they all fought under one unified command, in this case dominated by the British, and everyone was interchangeable with each other. This gave them more cohesive force and the one that was able to respond to challenges without the mix of national politics. The Axis air forces were almost entirely German in this battle, but fascist Italy also contributed a small air group to the battle, albeit with far less capable equipment. The start of this battle can actually be debated. The first air raid warning in the United Kingdom was actually on the 3rd of September 1939, the day war was declared. But the British officially start this battle on the 10th of July 1940, which was when the Germans started their campaign in earnest against the United Kingdom. And to the British, it ended on the 31st of October 1940. While this overlaps with the Blitz period, which was the 7th of December 1940 to the 11th of May 1941, the British consider them separate with the cancellation of the German invasion of the United Kingdom, the infamous Operation Sea Lion. And that being the defining moment where the battle stopped being about survival and became about destruction. The German official history considers the entire period from July of 1940 to May of 1941 as a single campaign. So, Military Family Services is not affiliated with any products, companies, apps, or anything named in this presentation, and Military Family Services is not sponsored by or does not sponsor or does not endorse anything that I'm going to be talking about. So, what we're going to be talking about is some of the intended preparations, some travel advisories that you need to be aware of, some helpful hints and words that are very important when you're touring around, some must-try food and treats, because it is the United Kingdom, they are a food culture, some places to stay, transportation, and then into the battle itself. Starting with the small-scale raids in the early phase, the channel battles in the small but important second phase, the main assault, and then finally the beginning of the Blitz and the night bombing raids. We'll also talk about where you can visit and what's worth seeing. So, we're going to visit England. It's actually the southeast of England is where this battle took place. It has a population of about 27,945,000 people. Of course, the main language is English. And the airports that you're going to get to this area are London Heathrow, London Stansted, and London Gatwick. Inhabited since before Roman times, it is the scene of many battles, such as in the War of the Roses, and was heavily occupied by military forces during the First and Second World Wars. England is the 15th most expensive country in Europe, so its costs are higher than the average for Europe. And the typical food in the United Kingdom is supposedly roast beef and Yorkshire pudding, but the British have also now voted chicken tikka as their national dish, which is actually an Indian recipe that they have taken over. So, some recommended preparations. The United Kingdom is generally a mild climate with wet, cool winters and fairly warm, dry summers. The season is usually from the end of April to the end of October. For traveling is probably the best, most optimal time. The rest of those months are quite wet and miserable. A rain jacket is always a good idea when you're traveling around any battlefield. It happens to rain a lot in Europe, especially visiting some of the places, and also helps break the wind. You also should have good footwear because you're going to be walking a great deal. Travel and medical insurance is always highly recommended. You never know what's going to go wrong. Most memorials and most museums are child friendly places. So you can bring your children so they can see the monuments and the memorials and some of the items that they do have on display. And for city passes, London itself does have a city pass. So always important, check your travel advisories. Government of Canada has UK travel advice. It's one thing you need to really consider, especially when you're traveling to countries. There's some UK travel restrictions, but all have been lifted except for those coming from China currently. You can usually stay in the United Kingdom for up to 6 months. You might be able to apply for a longer stay in certain circumstances, such as for medical treatment. Now, some of the security considerations, terrorism and petty crime are a risk, but generally the United Kingdom is a very safe country. There are many hospitals and clinics all around the area we're visiting, and it's easy access in the United Kingdom. But their emergency number is 999. 112 calls are still actually answered. It will ring, but the official one for the United Kingdom is 999. And the closest Canadian embassy or consulate is in London. So some helpful tips. Always dress for the weather. It is close to the sea, so it can be really chilly. This battlefield does cover a fairly large chunk of the United Kingdom, and a lot of it happens close to the ocean. So just be forewarned, it can get quite cool unexpectedly. I always tell people, please don't climb on any monuments or vehicles. That's exactly what they are. They're usually monuments, and putting them outside puts them in some fairly rough condition, no matter how well maintained they are, increasing the danger to you. In some locations, there are often ashes spread around an aircraft or a vehicle because it's part of the crew of that vehicle. And so it can also be considered sacred ground. Also, remember, we're visiting somebody's home when you go to these battlefields. This is where they work and live. And to allow us to keep visiting, we need to respect their property, their memorials, and their space. Must try foods and treats. English food. It was a very, very yummy trip when I went. So if you're going to the United Kingdom and you're going to do Battle of Britain, you have to have fish and chips. English fish and chips are amazing. I've had them in Cornwall. I've had them in Devon. I've had them up north. Amazing food, must try, absolutely delicious. A full English breakfast. It's, as you can see, there's sausage, there's ham, there's stewed tomato, there's eggs, there's potatoes, there's scones. Again, if you're having one of these things, good hearty breakfast before you go on the battlefields, you probably won't need to eat till dinner. 99 flake or flake with ice cream. It's one of their British treats, definitely much more appealing than, say, tapioca or rice pudding, which are also British delicacies, if you can call them that. These are quite delicious. My kids and I both enjoyed them. And if you're in the United Kingdom and we're doing the Battle of Britain, you might just need to try some Spitfire Amber Ale. I have 2 bottles of this in my house. It's an excellent beer. It's absolutely fabulous. Highly recommended. And it's so appropriate for the Battle of Britain. So there are many options in the United Kingdom. The map on with all the hotels, it kind of just gives you the idea of how many hotels and kind of the price range. This covers such a large area, you can't really cover them all. So when you're picking, pick something you know, comfortable, and within your price point. I always recommend you get one with breakfast as well. It's really hard because this battlefield is so large on the British side, and that's even before the German side. And as you can tell in the other picture, that's roughly the biggest part of the battlefield in and around London. So you've got some significant ground there. Bolt and Uber are both in the UK. Just check their app to see which one is used in the town that you're staying or where you're close to. Tour guides, there are many, but if you want some good guides, I recommend you go to the Guild of Battlefield Guides website. There's a whole series of accredited and unaccredited guides there. I'm a member of it. They're an excellent source. Some of the best guides in the world are with them. Or you can also contact me and at Woolsey's War Walks. I have a Facebook page. You can contact me there and I can help you out. Good idea when you're traveling in Europe, if you're going to rent a vehicle, international driver's license. Lots of countries require that for you to rent a vehicle. So I highly, highly recommend that you have one before you travel. So the Battle of Britain itself. This is the best part of this presentation, in my opinion, which happens to be all the cool technology in airplanes. So the Royal Air Force could not be any more different than from the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. The Royal Air Force had several commands, but the one we're going to talk about is called Fighter Command. and it was led by a man named Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding, whose nickname was Stuffy, as he had absolutely no sense of humor. And now the British had the first fully integrated air defense system in the world, which Sir Hugh Dowding had created. It was actually called the Dowding system. And between that and his excellent management of this battle, it was completely decisive. He was much loved by his pilots, and he cared for them and their well-being. Under the Dowding system, there were 4 groups of aircraft. Number 10 group in the southwest, number 11 group in the southeast, which was the main group that fought the battle under Air Vice Marshal Keith Park, number 12 group in the center under Air Vice Marshal Tofford Lee Mallory, and number 13 group in the north under Air Vice Marshal Richard Saul. The Luftwaffe was headed by a man named Hermann Göring, a Nazi and a World War I fighter ace, and he was not well loved by his men due to his opulent lifestyle, and they committed 3 air fleets, or often called Luftflotten, similar to an RAF group, and Luftflotte 2 was commanded by Albert Kesselring, a World War I artillery officer turned Luftwaffe pilot, and it was aimed at the southeast of England. Luftflotte 3 was under Hugo Sparrow, and he was aimed at Wales, the Midlands, and northwest England, and Luftflotte 5 under Hans-Jürgen Strumpf, who was aimed at Scotland in the very north of England. The Italian Air Corps, which was operating from France, was under Rino Corso Fuggire. So this battle made or broke some of the reputations of the aircraft involved. The list of some of the aircraft that were flown from the British side, there was 71 different squadrons of aircraft in the battle, flying the Hurricane Mark 1 and 2, Spitfire, Defiant, Blenheim Beaufighter, Gladiator and Sea Gladiator biplanes, the Martlet Mark 1, otherwise known as the Wildcat in later terms, it's an American plane, and the Fulmar. The Germans and the Italians, on the other hand, had very different aircraft. So the main one for the German was the Messerschmitt Bf-109E or F variant, the Bf-110C destroyer, Italy's CR-42 Falco and G-50 Fricka. They flew the Du-17 bombers, Henkel 111 bombers, Ju-87B, the Stuka dive bombers, which everybody was afraid of at the time, the Ju-88A, which was a high-level bomber, the Focke-Wulf 200C Condor, and the BR-20 bomber from Italy. Now, some of these aircraft had their reputations blown to incredible levels. Hurricane, specifically the Spitfire, was a well-loved aircraft, as was the Bf-109. But for other aircraft, such as the Boulton-Paul Defiant, which we will see later, the Bf-110, and specifically the Ju-87, their reputations suffered immensely. So, the battle begins. The small-scale raids from the 26th of June to the 16th of July, 1940. This first phase of the battle began slowly, as, after the victories in France and the Low Countries, the Luftwaffe needed to organize and reset after hard fighting and heavy losses. At first, it was sporadic small raids from the 5th of June 1940, which were used mainly as training by the Luftwaffe in strategic bombing at night. They discovered slowly that it was more efficient to use smaller bombs with a mix of high explosive and incendiaries rather than a few very large bombs. This phase also allowed the British to analyze what the Germans were up to, practice and prepare for when the real fighting began in earnest. The small-scale raids grew in size, starting on the 26th of June. A few days later, the first daylight raids began, hitting the cities of Hull and Wick. Later, some other targeted attacks aimed at setting off air raid alarms, sowing general fear, and drawing off RAF fighters. In total, in this period, 1,062 small raids hit all across the United Kingdom. So, the Hawker Hurricane Mark 1 was the mainstay fighter in this phase for the Royal Air Force. It is not as glorious as the Spitfire in a lot of ways, and the Spitfire earned its loving reputation in this battle, but actually the Hurricane did most of the heavy lifting because they were targeting the bombers. The photo at the very top is a RAF fighter at its camp at Castle Camp in early July. The Ju-87, which is the photo to its immediate right, is a Ju-87 Stuka dropping its bombs over England early in July in the small-scale raids. Below it is some of the few, which is a phrase we'll hear later on. Those are pilots of 151 Squadron, one of the squadrons that did a lot of fighting. And the other bottom aircraft is a Heinkel 111 P, which of KG-55, and it was shot down by 4-3 Squadron Hurricanes on the 12th of July, 1940. The Channel battles from the 17th of July to the 20th of August, 1940. On the 17th of July brought the second phase into existence, which was launched against the shipping in the English Channel. It actually started because Hugo Sparrow and Albert Kesselring didn't really know what to do next. It did give more practice to the Luftwaffe crews and allowed for more probing of the British defenses. The doubting system actually didn't provide adequate cover for the Channel, and so the Luftwaffe fared fairly well in these battles, as the bombers had escorts and they outnumbered the few RAF defenders in the coastal regions. On the 19th of July, 9 Bolton-Paul Defiant fighters, which is a turreted fighter. So think of a Hurricane, and instead of having forward firing guns, it has a turret in the back with 4 machine guns and it can't shoot forward. From 141 Squadron went into action, and 6 were quickly shot down by the German Bf 109 fighters before some Hawker Hurricanes intervened. On the 25th, a convoy and its escorts suffered so many losses to the Ju-87 dive bombers that attacked it that the Royal Navy changed to nighttime convoy operations in the English Channel only, and the air losses were 16 German and 7 British planes that day. By the 8th of August, the British had lost a total of 18 coal ships, which was a serious issue, as the country used coal for everything from heat to power and in use in factories, as well as losing 4 destroyers, and so the Royal Navy pressed one last 20-ship convoy into the Channel, losing 4 ships sunk, 6 damaged, and only 4 actually made it to their destination. The Ju-87s and their escorts suffered 13 aircraft losses to the RAF's 19 fighters shot down. This action ended all Channel convoys, and coal and other supplies had to start beginning to move by rail, which was considered safer. So one thing people don't realize that when aircraft attack ships in the water, a direct hit doesn't have to do the damage to wreck the ship. Basically, if it lands close enough, the concussive force of the bomb in the water will actually damage and wreck ships quite quickly. And the top photo is actually one of the ships under one of the convoys under attack in July of 1940. HMS Brazen was sinking in this photo after being bombed by a Ju-87 while protecting a convoy. The ship lost 1 crew, but did shoot down 3 aircraft on the 20th of July. And the other picture were some of the few Spitfires that were available in this time period in that sector, and they belonged to number 610 Squadron. The main assault, the 6th of September, 13th of August to the 6th of September. Luftwaffe intelligence reports had given Hermann Göring the impression that the RAF was almost defeated and that the raids would draw off the rest of the Royal Air Force strength and into battle to be destroyed. And so it was decided that the next step was to destroy the airfields across the south of England in 4 days and then move on to military and economic targets until German daylight raids could go in without resistance, and then they would begin a major bombing of London. Eagle Day, as it was codenamed, was delayed due to poor weather, but on the 12th of August, a special raid by a fighter bomber unit hit 4 radar stations in an attempt to blind the Royal Air Force. 3 were taken offline, but only for about 6 hours, and it appeared to show that it was very hard to knock them out. The Luftwaffe chose not to follow up with any more attacks and did not attack any of the support infrastructure, which probably would have been more effective. The actual Eagle Day, when it began, with attacks on the forward landing grounds along the coast of England, along with any satellite airfields, and as the week went on, the attacks moved inland with some more raids against some of the smaller radar stations. The 15th of August, 1940, was the greatest day when the Luftwaffe launched the most attacks during the campaign. Luftflotte 5, attacking in the north of the United Kingdom, thought that most of the Royal Air Force had been drawn south, only to face incredibly strong resistance from the Royal Airfield based at Great Driffield. That it was attacked by some Ju-88 bombers that were unescorted. The results were disastrous for the Luftwaffe, losing 75 planes out of the 115 bombers and 34 fighters they launched. So they lost 75 out of 149 planes on that raid. This effectively neutralized Luftflotte 5 for the rest of the battle. The 18th of August, a few days later, was named the hardest day by both sides because of the losses suffered. The air battles were the largest aerial battles to date, and Luftwaffe intelligence again had estimated that the RAF was only down to about 300 aircraft, where in fact the RAF actually had 1,438 aircraft, including 84 training units and 300 in storage. This gross miscalculation would have terrible consequences. The German plan called for an all-out assault on every RAF airfield in the southeast of England, and despite the heavy losses since the 15th, Albert Kesselring convinced Hermann Göring, the Luftwaffe commander, that the tactic of heavily escorted bombers to destroy the airfields was sound, with the introduction of free-flying squadrons of fighters to help destroy any additional opposition. The focus was now on a few airfields in hope to shatter the Royal Air Force's strength. The morning of the 18th was a clear and sunny as the Luftwaffe units took off and formed up, the 108 bombers and 150 fighters around the Pas de Calais, which the RAF quickly detected on their radar screens. They reported 350 aircraft by 12:45 p.m. The British quickly scrambled 5 fighter squadrons from 11 Group with 17 Spitfires and 36 Hurricanes to the north, and 4 more squadrons with 23 Spitfires and 27 Hurricanes over the Biggin Hill base for a total of 97 fighters. The fight began when the advanced group of German aircraft crossed the channel and came across some Hurricanes from 501 Squadron, which they quickly attacked, shooting down 4 planes in about 2 minutes. The bombers were not far behind, and when they crossed the English coast, they were quickly met by flak as the bombers separated off to go to their targets. The Observer Corps, part of the Dowding system, reported their every move and communicated this by telephone to all the operations centers spread around the country. This happened to save a squadron of Hurricanes taking off at Croydon from destruction, as they had been trying to take off and flown away to safety. These weren't combat-ready aircraft yet. The BBC transmitter was also shut down, taking the World Service off the air to prevent the Germans from using it as a direction-finding point. One of the bomber wings was only 2 minutes away from their target before they met any resistance, which was a surprise. But their leader was using low-level flying and navigation to get them there. As he burst over the airfield at Kenley, they were met with a hail of Bofors and machine gun fire, and some of the 111 Squadron Hurricanes that had been at about 3,000 feet above them and pounced on them, with the Germans losing 1 aircraft, either to one of the fighters or to AA fire. And so the Hurricanes peeled away so they could attack the bombers as they exited their attack. Noticing 2 Hurricanes from 615 Squadron were trying to also take off during the attack. Within minutes of it starting, all the German bombers had been hit, with many crew being killed or wounded. Another 111 Squadron Hurricane was shot down, but not before firing another killing burst and shooting down another Dornier 17. 2 other bombers were also hit by parachute cable launchers, which is basically a rocket that attached to a long cable with a mine on the end of it. They would shoot into the air, it would snag the airplane's wings, and as it flew by, the mine would hit the aircraft. And those 2 dragged 2 more aircrafts to the ground and made them crash. Of the 9 German aircraft on that raid, 4 were lost and 2 crashed on when they landed, the rest all being heavily damaged. But the raid had destroyed some hangars and some 8 aircraft on the ground, but only put the airfield out of action for about 2 hours, and this raid was the end of all low-level attacks. At the same time, a raid on Biggin Hill had begun. 615 Squadron of the Royal Air Force patrolling it when some German Bf-109 fighters tried to attack them, quickly shooting down 2 Hurricanes. While this was a surprise, the fighters then left their own bombers undefended to take on the British Hurricanes. And a separate British squadron, 32 Squadron, came out and started shooting down bombers and forced the bombers to actually not hit their target. A second pass by the Hurricanes was interfered with by some extra Bf-110 heavy fighters that arrived, and which cost the Hurricanes 1 of their own, but a group of 6 Spitfires showed up from way higher altitudes, and they jumped on those guys and shot down 3 more German aircraft. Back at Kenley, some more Ju-88 medium bombers had arrived over the target, but it was obscured by smoke and from the first raid, and were still trying to figure out what to do when they were attacked, and their defending fighters had a tough time because the AA guns also opened up on them at the same time, hitting and damaging one of the bombers and several of the fighters. As the German fighters moved to protect the damaged bomber, more Hurricanes swept in and shot down another German bomber. 4 of the squadrons defending had been drawn into the air battles over Kenley and Biggin Hill, and another bomber unit appeared, and its escorting fighters kept the 15 Spitfires that were defending it from interfering, but they could do no damage at Biggin Hill, and they lost more bombers as a result. And then, as they were trying to make good their escape, they stumbled into a dogfight between 6-5 Squadron of the Royal Air Force and Germans KG-54, which were on a fighter sweep. The German aircraft had done fairly well that day, but the toughest part was yet to come, withdrawing from the fight. The German fighters were low on fuel, as early fighters did not have much range, and they were primarily a defensive weapon, and could do little to help the bombers, and so the damaged stragglers fell quick prey to the Royal Air Force fighters, who were on home turf and close to their own airfields. And by 1:30 in the afternoon, all the German attackers were on their way home, with a new threat of another 23 Spitfires and 36 Hurricanes moving to meet them on their return trip. With a haze developing over the day, Air Vice Marshal Keith Park ordered his fighters to spread out and attack even on their own in an all-or-nothing gamble which quickly paid off. In short order, 5 heavy fighters were shot down, followed by 2 more destroyed and 2 more damaged, as well as with no losses to the RAF. That same group of aircraft, as they were withdrawing, got hit by 2 more fighter squadrons, losing more, and total of 12 aircraft shot down in the withdrawal, and 7 more were damaged. The last defending squadron that day was the last squadron in the air, 266 Squadron of the Royal Air Force, which, as they were fighting the last action, got shot down 5 more German fighters. And while this was happening, more German units decided to show up to the battle. Ju-87 units of Luftflotte 3 were coming together along with, for a total of 109 bombers, to target British radar sites. They had to move close to conduct the attack, and at 1:30 they were in the air and were detected. The RAF scrambled what it had left, putting up 68 more fighters, and some Blemen light bombers from Coastal Command to act as heavy fighters. The British were outnumbered 4-1 in aircraft and 2-1 in fighters. As the raid crossed the coast, they split up to their targets, and unopposed they hit the radar stations at Poling and Ford, doing some damage and knocking them out. But with the RAF's mobile stations taking up the task, there was nothing more than an inconvenience. 3 of the escorts were lost to a single tangle with Spitfires from 234 Squadron. One of the attacking Ju-87 groups met with complete disaster. The 28 of the last group that were attacked by Hurricane squadrons, as their escorts were too far away. 18 Hurricanes came down onto the Stukas and shot down 3 in the first path without losing any, and soon they were attacking the escorting fighters. And in short order, 300 aircraft were spread over 25 miles in a big, massive air battle. It was costly, with 15 German bombers and 6 fighters shot down to the cost of 4 British Spitfires. The result of this attack was that the Ju-87 was withdrawn from action in the battle from then on. They had damaged Ford and wrecked several aircraft on the ground, but fortunately these were old biplane airplanes and were essentially decoys. Several hours passed before the next wave struck, and at 5 o'clock, 51 Heinkel bombers were spotted coming towards Kent, along with their 140 escorts. Fighter Command put up another 47 Spitfires and 97 Hurricanes. The first raid met fierce resistance as they approached, but were unable to drop their bombs as the clouds had moved in over the target, and they withdrew, dropping their bombs more randomly on their way home, doing some damage to the towns near the coast. But the aborted raid had cost the Germans 4 bombers and 7 escorts, to the cost of 4 Royal Air Force fighters. A second group lost 5 more fighters over Herne Bay in Chatham in Kent, to the loss of only a few Hurricanes. That night, the Luftwaffe tried again, trying to hit targets all over the country, but with no damage, with most bombs falling on the countryside, and the losses that night were only 1 German HE-111 Heinkel bomber, which crashed into an Avro Anson that was on a night flying training mission. And that was the end of the hardest day, with the German losing 71 aircraft to the British 68. The end result was that the Ju-87 and Bf-110s were withdrawn, radar sites were no longer targeted, and the free fighter tactic proposed by Kesselring was abandoned to give more escort to the bombers. The next part in this phase was the switch from attacking airfields and radar to attacking aircraft factories, as again, the Luftwaffe intelligence system assumed that the RAF was struggling and would be on its knees shortly. And so on the 19th and 20th of August 1940, they bombed targets in and around London, Bristol, Birmingham, Portsmouth, damaging much and killing civilians. On the 24th of August, the order was to relentlessly hammer the RAF airfields and aircraft industry with 33 attacks over the next 2 weeks, just on 11 Group itself. 58 Fleet Air Arm, as well as some light bomber pilots, were sent to Fighter Command, along with some influx air crews from all over the Dominion and Empire and free allied nations. While this part of the battle was hard, the British suffered less, as their pilots who bailed out almost always landed on home soil and could be back in action quickly. And in fact, one pilot was shot down a shockingly 5 times and went back into the fight. The German pilots, of course, would not. They would either become prisoners of war or worse, they would crash over the English Channel and possibly die in its cold waters. This started to take a terrible toll on German morale. For all the effort, the official opinion was that the Luftwaffe was that what to push and knock out the RAF had little effect, as the bases were only down for a short period of time and planes were redirected to other airfields. Aircraft production during this phase also kept up with losses, as did aircrew training, so the actual number of aircraft and pilots increased over this phase. And it was also in this time that the only Victoria Cross awarded to a fighter pilot in the entirety of the Second World War was done. It was awarded to a pilot from 249 Gold Coast Squadron, a Hurricane pilot named Flight Lieutenant Jamie Nicholson, who on the 16th of August 1940 was attacked by a German Messerschmitt Bf-110 and was about to bail out because his plane was on fire. But then he decided that he would get back into his airplane because a German bomber had crossed his gun sights, and he decided to shoot it down. He was again the only VC of a fighter pilot during the war. So the photos that you're seeing in this sketch are some German Dornier bombers, or HE-111, en route to the United Kingdom on a raid in September. The top picture is gun camera footage from a Spitfire shooting at some Germans and a Bf-109 fighter that has crashed. And that is some of the that's an aerial footage from a high-level aircraft on the bottom of the 18th of September air raid, which was quite a significant action. And now becomes the Blitz. The 25th of August 1940, RAF Bomber Command had targeted Berlin. These minor raids had been happening since May of 1940, and the German population was starting to get restless for revenge. And due to the weather, the bombs hit across the city, killing some civilians and causing some minor damage. And they continued to hit Berlin until the 30th of August, when Hitler lifted his prohibition against the terror bombing of British cities. The 7th of September began this new and vicious phase, and 400 bombers attacked London's East End both day and night. The RAF met them, and in greater numbers than expected. Yet again, the German intelligence got it wrong. While Fighter Command was exhausted, this change in attacks allowed them to catch their breath. The fighters were more successful in intercepting the daylight raids, and soon the morning raids by the Luftwaffe had to be cancelled due to losses, and the attacks being confined only to starting in late afternoon. And it went on for 57 nights, wreaking havoc across England. The Luftwaffe suffered as the Bf-109 fighters had extremely limited range and could not escort the bombers all the way to London, leaving them vulnerable. The politics of Nazi Germany were that in mid-September, Hitler had made decisions that would start to affect the campaign, such as he refused to unleash the full terror bombing of civilians, instead wanting to crush the political will by attacking food and industry. The 15th of September, the RAF repulsed 2 attacks at the cost of 60 German aircraft to 26 British, a decisive defeat that led to the cancelling of the proposed invasion of Britain. The raids were not very successful, and it was the beginning of the end of the battle. And now the 15th of September is commemorated as the Battle of Britain Day. After realizing that the RAF had not been defeated, the focus continued to break the will of the German people, the British people, becoming the first strategic bombing campaign in history. Because of the unsustainable losses during daylight raids, the Luftwaffe turned to night bombing, which the RAF struggled to stop, as they only had limited night fighters and airborne radar was not a thing yet. And so they had to bring in extra air defenses into the city, but they too were very limited at night, being spotlights and anti-aircraft guns. Any daylight operations in the fall of 1940 were only conducted by the Bf-109 fighters in a fighter bomber role, while the bomber force reached its peaks raids in October and November of 1940, where they targeted the ports and industrial areas all over the United Kingdom. The bombing offensive was relentless, and the anti-aircraft defenses, for all of their efforts to bring down aircraft, brought down very few. And with the Germans mixing incendiary and high explosives bombs, the damage and destruction to infrastructure became more widespread. Taking out rail lines, water lines, gas lines, and destroying many houses. But over time, the British air defenses improved. They started to use the Defiant fighter, which failed as a daylight fighter, as a night fighter, as they could approach it from the side in two sets of eyes, and it was a small enough aircraft not to get in the way. And they were shot down, the 4 squadrons of Defiance that operated in the night role shot down more aircraft than the Blenheim and Beaufighter squadrons that were purpose-built night fighters. They also reorganized their anti-aircraft guns and planning and sighting, and reduced the number of rounds shot used to shoot down an aircraft, bringing it from 20,000 rounds per aircraft to 4,000. And they made better use of searchlights and radar to bring their targets. So the big picture over London, that's an HE-111 on the very first day of the raid when they were targeting the east end of London. The map that's in the circle, the dark black areas are the sections that were completely destroyed in some of those raids. So if you see a black section, those are areas that were completely leveled. And of course, the docks on fire as a result of those raids on the 7th of September. The night bombing raids begin. While the Luftwaffe had carried out some spectacular attacks and had some success, it ultimately failed in its mission. Partially out of an unwillingness to work with the Kriegsmarine, the German Navy, and partially out of political bickering and poor leadership and faulty intelligence, the Germans were unable to destroy the Royal Air Force. And for its part, the Royal Air Force was exceptionally well led, had a sound system, and was fighting on home soil, which is a huge advantage. The raids disturbed civilians and continued a war of attrition against Fighter Command. But the raids were intended to carry out precision bombing on military and economic targets, but it was almost impossible to achieve sufficient accuracy with a single bomb and the technology of the time. Sometimes when attacked, the fighter bombers or bombers would jettison their load to get away from the action or act as fighters. The Royal Air Force was at a disadvantage at times and had changed defensive tactics by introducing standing patrols of Spitfires at a higher altitude to monitor incoming raids. On sighting, other patrols at lower altitude would fly up to join the battle. It was not super successful. The German bombing reached its peak in October and November of 1940, with the aims as an economic blockade in conjunction with the submarine warfare and attrition on Britain's military and economic resources. The Luftwaffe wanted to achieve a victory all on its own and was reluctant to cooperate with anyone. Their strategy for the blockade was to destroy ports and storage facilities, cities, and towns. The priorities were based on a pattern of trade and distribution, and so for these months, London was the main target. In November, their attention turned to other ports and other industrial targets around England. Ultimately, with Hitler postponing Operation Sea Lion until the spring of 1941 in his mind, which was issued on Directive 21, which was officially issued on the 18th of December, the official threat to England and its invasion was officially ended. So one of the things about the bombing raids in this period was that there was not enough air raid shelters to house the population of London. And so they started using the underground tube, and the level of destruction wrought upon the United Kingdom was still in place actually until the 1970s. My father had made mention several times when he was visiting his family there, how much damage was still present in London from the Second World War. So where can you visit? There are many places you can visit, memorials and museums to the battle. Sadly, though, many of the airfields are gone, but a few still kind of exist. There's the Battle of Britain Monument in London. One of my favorites, the Imperial War Museum in Duxford, which is 1.6 kilometers of hangars and aircraft from all periods, and a lot of them from the Royal Air Force. And you can get a ride in a Spitfire and Hurricane there, just to let you know. It's an incredible museum with a great collection and has an op center, and it was a Battle of Britain airfield that is quite spectacular. There's the Battle of Britain Memorial at Capel La Fère in Kent, which is where the soldier is sitting, or the airman sitting on the stone. There's the Battle of Britain Museum at Hawkage in Kent, and there's the Battle of Britain Museum at Stanmore, built at the old RAF Bentley Priory. The term "a few" came into use during this wartime thanks to a speech by Winston Churchill, along with the term "the darkest hour," whose usage is also attributed to him, but origins are less clear. The few usually refers to the aircrew who fought the battle. And during the Battle of Britain, 1/5 of Fighter Command's aircrew came from overseas, with 16 nations represented in its squadron, a total of 126 New Zealanders, 112 Canadians, 33 Australians, 25 South Africans, 3 Rhodesians, 1 Jamaican, 1 from Barbados, 1 Newfoundlander, 145 Poles, 88 Czechs, 29 Belgian, 13 French, 1 Austrian, 10 Irish, and 11 Americans officially participated in the battle. A total of 71 squadrons are credited to having fought in the battle, and only one of those is a Royal Canadian Air Force squadron, originally numbered 1 squadron, later 401 squadron, which still exists today. The few, and this is always worth the mention, was helped, in fact, by a great many. The few always referred to by the Prime Minister was the nearly 2,400 aircrew that flew in the battle. But the fully integrated air defense system, the Dowding system, incorporated thousands of men and women. In fact, women played an absolutely critical role in this battle, in that they plotted, tracked, and communicated the raids and with the RAF defenders. Women were intimately involved in what today we would call the kill chain. They also suffered losses when RAF airfields and radar installations were targeted. 138 pilots in this battle became aces, which is 5 kills or more in a battle, and 4 became ace in a day, 2 Brits, 1 Pole, and a New Zealander. But the losses were pretty brutal, and England was soon littered with the wrecks of German and British planes. The RAF lost in total 1,744 planes, 544 killed, and 442 wounded. The Luftwaffe, on the other hand, lost 1,977 aircraft, 2,585 killed, 735 wounded, and 925 prisoners of war. The other toll was the 23,000 civilians killed from July to December 1940, with the other 32,000 wounded in that time period. And because of the nature of aerial warfare, many pilots and aircrew have no known grave, and so the Commonwealth War Graves Commission has a memorial at Runnymede, which commemorates the 20,265 aircrew that fell during the course of the Second World War and have no known grave. It's worth visiting, and the Commonwealth War Graves Commission website has a complete list of names and their locations on the memorial. Thank you very much.